Hello, everyone. Welcome to Our St. Paul Learn with the League. Today, we'll learn from three Minnesota academic leaders about the recent challenges to higher education from the federal government. My name is Cheryl Bailey. I'm a League member and the Program Committee co-chair, and I'll moderate today's presentation. Next slide, please. We have had a good rapport with SPNN and SCC. Next slide, please, on our online program, so thanks to them. And you can watch our previous programs in a created playlist on our YouTube channel. By now, we're all familiar with Zoom. If you have a question, please type your Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen. Next slide. To begin with, I want to share a few of the policy positions that are very tangentially related to academic freedom from the League of Women Voters of Minnesota. They're very straightforward language, stating what I imagine everyone agrees with in principle. All Americans should have good access to good education. Next slide. So let's talk about this past year and the highly publicized jolts to the world of higher education from this new administration. According to National Public Radio, as of 2021, the federal government funded colleges and universities with about $180 billion every year, and this came from dozens of federal agencies. Via an executive order 1 year ago on January 29th, 2025, the current president accused higher education of anti-Semitism and a, quote, woke agenda on their campuses, and threatened to rescind nearly $11 billion already appropriated federal funds to very specific universities. So that accounts for about 6% of all federal funding. Within weeks of that executive order, federal agencies started withholding billions of dollars in contracts and grants from several high-profile schools and pressured them to align their policies more closely with the current administration on a range of issues that extended far beyond anti-Semitism. Many institutions scrambled, some negotiated, some might say caved, and they tried to claw back the money to their professors and lab scientists and institutions that they had been counting on to do their work, teach their students, make their discoveries, and publish their findings. As noted by Jefferson Public Radio in January of 2026, some universities paid the government millions of dollars. Others paid nothing, but agreed to policy or personnel changes. But a common theme has emerged over the past year. The administration is seeking to alter the culture at these powerful institutions, barring them, for instance, from supporting programs aimed at diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide. So how about the specific details? There are so many, but here are a few. In June of last year, Columbia University's president released this description of the agreement they reached. You can read the full slide there. In that website of the president from Columbia University, they also say, this agreement establishes a jointly selected independent monitor who will assess the implementation of this resolution. The university will provide regular reports to the monitor, documenting its adherence to the agreement and its continued compliance with applicable federal laws and regulations pertaining to admissions, hiring, and international students. These provisions reflect Columbia's broader commitment to transparency, institutional accountability, and sustained progress on our commitments. Next slide. And UCLA was the first public university targeted and threatened. During the summer of 2025, the administration demanded $1.2 billion from UCLA, claiming that it was anti-Semitic. And they demanded, among other things, that the school keep out foreign students if they might engage in anti-American, anti-Western, or anti-Semitic, quote, disruptions. The AP reported in November 15th of last year that a federal judge issued a preliminary injunction against this administration from cutting UCLA's funding, citing there was, quote, overwhelming evidence that the administration is engaged in a concerted effort to purge, quote, woke, left, and socialist, end quote, viewpoints from our country's leading universities. And next slide. There's a little institution on the East Coast called Harvard, and you've probably seen multiple things in the news about Harvard. This has been a top target of this administration with a litany of accusations from anti-Semitism to illegally considering race in its administrative process. You might think I'm terrible at making slides, and you would be right. I am terrible at making slides. But this one is terrible because there have been so many new developments each day. And even as of Friday, the president went from demanding $500 million from Harvard to demanding $1 billion because they are, quote, behaving very badly. And Reuters reported just 2 days ago that the administration now sued Harvard, accusing it of failing to comply with its federal investigation. And finally, next slide. Texas A&M has been in the news with over 200 of its courses at the College of Arts and Sciences flagged or canceled by university leaders for gender or race-related content, famously including Plato's Symposium. Professor Martin Peterson emailed his department chair, Christy Sweet, quote, "Your decision to bar a philosophy professor from teaching Plato is unprecedented. You are making Texas A&M famous, but not for the right reasons," end quote. Next slide. So there are countless other examples, but you get the idea. Our program today will try to pin down what academic freedom means from to administrators and to professors on 3 Minnesota campuses. We'll try to make the case that freedom to teach and learn is critical not just to our panel, not just to the audience, and not just to the students that they teach, but to our country. And while federal pressure to withhold money is important, so is the incessant belittling of what I would argue is one of America's greatest assets, our institutions of higher learning. So let's go ahead and meet our panel. I'm so pleased to introduce our 3 speakers. You'll notice from their biography slides that not only do they come from different Minnesota institutions, but they've trained throughout the country and the world, and they will draw on that font of knowledge in today's discussion. First, we'll welcome Dr. Gretchen Ritter. She's from the University of Minnesota. In addition to being the Chief Academic Officer at the 5 U of M campuses, she serves as Provost at the Twin Cities campus. Her most recent work at Syracuse University highlighted civic engagement, community service, civil dialogue, and free expression across viewpoints. And I believe that sounds right up the alley of the League of Women Voters. Dr. Ritter is nationally recognized for her expertise in women's constitutional rights, current issues in U.S. democracy, and the Constitution. So we are very, very glad to have Dr. Ritter on this panel. Next slide, please. We would like to welcome back to the League of Women Voters Dr. Walter Greason. He is the DeWitt Wallace Professor of History at Macalester College. And do not think for a moment at looking at this slide that teaching history is all Dr. Greason spends his time on. He writes, he lectures, he uses historic renovation to preserve history and culture. He publishes graphic novels, and he promotes democracy and equality in all of his endeavors. He presented our May 2025 program on the fifth anniversary of George Floyd's murder. And I would send you to YouTube to watch that, but yours truly forgot to push record. That was our first hybrid program, and sadly, we don't have a recording of that. But those of us who were lucky enough to have been present know that we are all in for a very special conversation with Dr. Greason. Thank you for being here. And finally, I'm pleased to introduce Professor of Economics and Management at the University of Minnesota Morris, Dr. Arne Kildegaard. Widely traveled and credentialed, Dr. Kildegaard's early publications addressed financial issues and capital flow in developing countries. More recently, he's written on clean energy transition, and Dr. Kildegaard co-authored grants to transition Morris's campus to carbon net neutral in electricity. He will bring his insight from academia in Europe and Mexico, as well as the US, to today's discussion on academic freedom. So many thanks to all 3 of you for agreeing to speak today. I think if we could go with Dr. Ritter first, we'll begin with you and we'll hear our thoughts on the pressures and pleasures of academia in Minnesota today. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I'm also really pleased to be on a panel with the other distinguished speakers here. So I thought I would just take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about what academic freedom is, how it differs from freedom of speech, what is happening right now, and a couple of thoughts on some positive things we can do to address current concerns. So academic freedom is something that has been a set of principles that have been with us for about a century, really, and came out of concerns of political pressures being put on faculty members at different institutions, including folks who were fired for their scholarly work. And the principle behind why we should protect the freedom of scholars to do their work has four components to it. The first is protection for freedom of research or scholarship. The second aspect of it is freedom with regard to teaching, particularly the materials that one chooses to teach with. The third is freedom to question the administration of one's college or university. And finally, there's a commitment to the ability of academics to engage as citizens and speak about issues, particularly issues that they have expertise on publicly. The other part of academic freedom to keep in mind is a couple of sets of expectations that go along with it. One of which is that the freedom with regard to both research and teaching is explicitly within one's area of disciplinary expertise. And I'll say a bit more about that. But if you are trained as a historian, your freedom is within that domain of your expertise in history. We would not defend your freedom to speak on issues of theoretical physics, for instance, not in that regard. And then the second is a notion of responsibility that there should be thought given to how to exercise these rights in a responsible manner that have to do with your community and your institution and how to protect and support those. So one of the ways to think about the difference between academic freedom and freedom of speech is that academic freedom is really specifically about one's freedom within an area of expertise. And part of the reason that we protect it this way also is that we expect that the norms and processes within an academic discipline help to determine whether your scholarly work or your teaching meets the standards of the discipline. So you don't need external validation of that. You expect it to happen within the norms of the discipline. Freedom of speech or expression is something that anyone has as a citizen or as a member of a democratic community. Makes no assumptions about expertise. It does assume that the exchange of ideas is how you become informed as a citizen, is how you sort of test out different ideas. It's how you seek truth. So that's a little bit about what these rights are about and how you would distinguish between those two areas. In terms of what is happening now, there's no doubt that the last year has ratcheted up some of the pressures with regard to academic freedom, but I would say that those pressures date back considerably before the last year. Probably really the last couple of decades, we've seen a number of forces, both internal to universities and external to universities, that have questioned or sought to limit freedom of academic expertise in various ways, including some of the cases you heard about in the intro to this session. So internally, some of those pressures include the expectations sometimes of students, of faculty members who will sometimes see certain forms of speech itself as problematic or hateful, and have expectations about speech that should not be allowed, including within an area of academic expertise, if it doesn't meet expectations about speech that is supportive and acknowledging of all groups. What this has meant, among other things, is that we often have faculty members who are concerned about what happens in their classes. I've had over the years a number of faculty say, if I get questioned, will you protect me? And what are we protecting them from? We're protecting them, for instance, from maybe a student videotaping them in class and posting it online and saying, isn't this person terrible? We've had instances of faculty members in law who've decided that they can't any longer teach rape in criminal justice classes for concern about student reaction. The other side, which I think we've seen numerous examples of lately, is pressure externally from government institutions at the state level, at the national level, that have sought explicitly to restrict the ability of faculty members to teach on certain topics, to conduct and speak to their research in certain areas. And that is pressure that we've seen examples of around the country in recent years, and it should be concerning to all of us. Just a couple of more words on this. Why does it matter, right? So one of the questions we could all ask is why does it matter? It matters because the freedom to explore ideas, the freedom to question commonly held assumptions or views is how we get to discovery, to new knowledge, to innovation of various kinds. And I would argue that it's what we want to educate people about to help them become civically engaged as well. If a policy position is taken, if a government leader tells you certain things, it is our hope and expectation that you take a look at that carefully. What is that claim based on? Why does the evidence in certain regards seem to contradict it? What would other voices tell us might be a better approach to this issue? So I think the kind of freedom that we protect within the university is similar to the freedoms that benefit us all in a healthy democracy as well. And finally, in terms of what can we do to help push things in a more positive direction, here, I think we need to focus on the fact that one of the reasons that we're in such a difficult moment, not just within universities, but within our society, is because we are in a situation of extreme political polarization, where people tend to assume that anyone who doesn't share their core political philosophy is saying things that are false, that are problematic, and it undermines our ability to really hear and exchange views from a number of different perspectives and points of view. So encouraging civic engagement, encouraging pluralism, encouraging real listening, making sure that we're open to talking to and hearing from whether it's faculty members or neighbors who have different points of view is something that I think all of us can contribute to that would benefit us all. And I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you so much. Yep, it's a good distinction, academic freedom and just freedom to speak freely as a citizen. So I will ask Dr. Greason to turn on his video and mic, and we'd like to hear from you, Dr. Greason. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with all of you as we consider really a central topic to the future of freedom, not just in the United States, but actually across civil society in the world. I'm a professor at Macalester College, so that frames the way I will speak to this today. Although I've worked at a number of extraordinarily conservative institutions over the last 30 years, that will shape a lot of what I hope to share in the next few minutes. I guess I'll start with the idea that we don't have the best understanding publicly of academic freedom in the historical context of higher education in Western society. And so whether you go back to Oxford and Cambridge, or you go back to Harvard and Yale and University of Virginia, University of Pennsylvania, the idea of open inquiry, liberal arts education are all revolutionary challenges to the idea of religious instruction, moral instruction, at the foundation of what makes for a civil society. And so that challenge remained the core of the institution for the better part of 150 years. And it's at that point that there's a really sharp change towards scientific inquiry, empiricism, the idea that our evidence will guide the study and the research that we undertake. It's the root of the academy that we know today. And I'm particularly troubled by the assumption of the norms of that period because I couldn't exist had there not been a substantial challenge to those norms over the last 70 years. That African American faculty, in particular, immigrant faculty, even women faculty, let alone gay or lesbian faculty, had no role in higher education for most of its history. And these voices have come to the fore as we've learned to open the doors and to hear more voices. And it has substantially improved the kind of science, the kind of inquiry that we practice. But what's happened in the last 30 years in particular is really what defines the foundation of my career. I study the history of the idea of equality. And the first lecture I ever gave as a scholar was The Decline and Fall of American Equality, where we look at the Constitution and we look at the idea that states were intended to be equal, but not individuals. And that doesn't get challenged until 1868 with the 14th Amendment, which is the first step towards guaranteeing individual liberty on an equal basis for all people, protected by the federal government. And that begins the battle that we're focused on today, is who receives these individual protections? Who receives the protection of the federal government? And so in the context of a liberal arts college like Macalester, although I've also been at Swarthmore and at Williams and at Pomona and Occidental, these places are all defending voices that have tended to be on the margins. And I'd say Macalester in particular is exceptional for our students and our faculty in protecting the voices of the LGBTQ community and bringing them into civic discourse in ways that have been punished for most of the history of higher education. And so the open inquiry that we see across faculty, across the institution and the industry, and I make that distinction very emphatically, the institution and the industry of higher ed ignores the fact that business schools, engineering schools, overwhelmingly conservative, science faculty, typically more conservative, center right than other faculty. This perception of college and university faculty as overwhelmingly liberal, radical, socialist is an intentional distortion. It's an intentional misrepresentation. And it tends to look specifically at fields like history, although also religion and philosophy and English, and to a lesser extent, the social sciences. But these fields have just begun, after more than a century and a half, to include new voices, to bring people into the conversation in ways that they had been structurally excluded for most of the history of higher education. And that's the core of what I hope to communicate to start the conversation, is that this reaction in the last certainly decade, but intensely in the last 2 or 3 years, is an effort to distort and to silence and to remove the voices that challenge the institutional biases within higher education. That the effort that we saw to remove Claudine Gay as the president of Harvard University, the assumptions that are made behind a number of efforts to silence faculty of color and faculty from different kind of gender identity groups. This is all an effort. It's broadly described in the newspapers and the websites as Christian nationalism. but it's an attempt to return to a normative standard of whose voices can be heard in the United States, who is acceptable to be in the conversation, what ideas can be considered. And so as I talk about the history of equality and travel around the world to do that work, there's a radical rethinking in this moment that equality is old-fashioned or somehow out of tune with the realities that the world can sustain. And I'm especially sensitive to this as someone who studies the history of science, who studies the history of business, and that there was always resistance to the expansion of the promise of equality from the private sector. One of my great colleagues, Michael Katz, who was at the University of Pennsylvania, published almost 20 years ago that it was the public sector, it was the desegregation of the armed forces, it was the desegregation of the federal government that led to increased opportunity for all people, particularly through civil service and representation in federal labor unions. That process is intentionally targeted in the last decade to force more people into private sector employment and to minimize the abilities of many groups of people, immigrants, African Americans, but especially younger women, to find gainful employment outside of the private sector. There is daily rhetoric about the effort to force more women into early marriage and early childbearing so that nuclear families from an earlier time will become the norm in American society and in Western civilization again. Those arguments, those premises mitigate the ideas that come out of the 14th Amendment. And most of all, the distortions, the outright deceit that we've seen in Minnesota has taken a special hold in the last month as we've seen the use of military force to suppress these very same populations. And these have had a decidedly negative impact on myself and many of the people around me, including my family. And so this process is dangerous is an understatement. We are facing a threat about the rewriting of what makes for civil society. And it's not just in the US, it's not just in Europe. We are rewriting the terms of what a free society is for the 21st century. And if we allow advocates, however well-intentioned they may be, to articulate perspectives that actually negate the voices of people who have already suffered for decades and even centuries, we're missing and dismantling the best of our opportunities for open inquiry and academic freedom. And so I want to close with a bit that I've done. I'm a weird historian in the fact that before I ever became a scholar, I had spent more than a decade doing software engineering, building software for different kinds of applications before the internet was really popular. I was fortunate to be trained by people who worked in communications technologies like voice to text is probably one of the big ones. And so that experience shapes the logic that I use. I understand coding. I've built web crawlers, I've built chatbots. And for the last 4 or 5 years now, I've had a structured critique of large language models that now has been sustained by MIT and a number of other partners about the deception and about the distortion that's built into private sector large language systems. Most people call these things artificial intelligence, and it's a gross distortion, misrepresentation of what these systems are. But that is what's leading to even more confusion. And there's an intent about kind of obfuscating the language that we use and how we learn from each other that I see as the primary threat to higher education in the next decade. Unless we can come to a just and equitable foundation about how we all participate in the ways that we learn and the content we produce and how we disseminate new discovery, we're going to replicate structures of inequality and oppression that look very similar to things that took root at the beginning of the Jim Crow period and shaped the way that higher education has evolved for the last 150 or 160 years. So to that end, don't trust artificial intelligence, engage with it critically. The way that we're beginning to see productive ways to do this, and I do use a number of these techniques, is that we break down the structures of what these chatbots have to offer us and show students the flaws and the errors that are commonly replicated, repeated, and amplified through these systems. Sadly, most of the debate that we have around academic freedom replicates a lot of the problems that we're going to see, that we do see in large language models. We're not doing the work that takes advantage of more open inquiry, more voices, more insights, especially in the humanities and social sciences and the fine arts, that can then give us better conclusions, better empirical findings that can shape science, shape fact for the rest of the 21st century. So let me stop there and pass it on to the rest of the good folks in the conversation.
That was fantastic, as expected. Thank you, Dr. Greason. Now let's hear from Dr. Arne Kildegaard, and if we could start his slides.
Well, greetings, everyone. I am, as advertised, Arne Kildegaard, coming to you from the beautiful tallgrass prairies of western Minnesota, where I work at UMM, a little known but much respected branch of the University of Minnesota system. I've been here since 2001. I've spent the balance of my career here after being at several other institutions. And I think I would like to direct my comments mostly towards the texture of speech on a small liberal arts college where it turns out an awful lot of academia takes place. So next slide, please. These are just postcards from where I've been. I started out at lower left is the famous Lyceum at the University of Mississippi, where James Meredith marched to integrate the law school in 1962. From there, I moved to Tulane in New Orleans, top left. My research was on Latin American development from a macro perspective, and the upper right picture is of the famous stairs of the Jesuit part of the old university built in Guanajuato in the 1700s. And then lower right is my current campus, University of Minnesota Morris, and the natural prairie that's in behind it. Over on the side is the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Denmark, where I spent a year in the aughts. That's on a peninsula. It's where Niels Bohr was, under Niels Bohr's authorization, they built a civilian nuclear reactor, and they put it way outside the city so that population center would be safe just in case. I spent a year there. So that's some of my experience. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, this. Before I get to my comments, I do have a history. It turns out with the League of Women Voters. I think the year was 1985, and I was a graduate student at the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago, and I needed part-time work. And it turned out that the League of Women Voters was looking for some data analysis on precinct voting trends. The Chicago chapter was. So I put together my first ever resume, and it was distressingly thin. I couldn't even fill up a page after I exaggerated shamelessly what my qualifications in education were. There was still a lot of white space at the bottom, and I decided to throw an interests section on, as I'd been told some people do. So I put down the usual things, photography and, jogging or something like that. And then we'd been playing the dictionary game a couple nights earlier. If you don't know that, much hilarity results from it. But you pass around a dictionary and pick a word, and everybody makes up a definition, and you try to vote for the best one. Well, the word we discovered was spang-hewing, which is Webster's second, and it means, the definition is there, to throw a frog high into the air from the end of a stick. Well, I threw it on there just on a lark. I figured my impressive credentials, earning a bachelor's degree, and serving for a couple of years as a clerk at the Miriam Center for Public Administration would be so overwhelming that they would never get to the interest section. But in the interview itself, there was, I walked into the room in downtown Chicago, and there were three very well put together women of a certain age. And the first question out of their mouths was, Mr. Kildegaard, we've never heard of this hobby of yours. Bang, could you explain it? So, to make a long story short, I learned that freedom of expression and freedom from the consequences of expression are not the same thing. And it turned out that my services were not going to be required from the League of Women Voters, Chicago chapter. How different life might have been. Next slide, please. So the introduction was nice. We were described as three leaders in academia, and I think that's 2/3 right. I am very much sort of at the end of the line in my last semester before retirement here, and I'm sort of tending to my knitting and my students and my community on the way out. I did for a decade or so devote myself to administration, but I'm very much just a faculty member at this point. Issues of university policy are not my brief. I should say, by the way, whenever I speak in public, not just when my provost is present, that I speak on behalf of myself, not on behalf of the university itself. I'm hoping I might be able to add a little bit of texture from the context of a small liberal arts college. Let's see. So I've got a couple of examples. The first one is not that. The first one, I've drawn a line through. I was going to talk to how Larry Summers got himself in trouble years ago for speculating on difference in variance between the genders and how that might influence the number of applicants for particularly mathematical fields. There's a good story there, but Larry Summers is so discredited at this point. He was actually, I think, the only person ever given a lifetime ban from my professional association, the ASSA, the American Economics Association. So I'm going to drop Larry Summers, drop him like a stone. I will talk about a colleague of mine. I'm not going to mention his name, but it's no great mystery. He was in the news a few years ago, and he's still with us. But this particular guy is an analytic philosopher, and he's one of those sort of Facebook geniuses. He cultivates a community of a sort of professional interest community on his Facebook page. It's 100%, or it's an infinite signal to noise ratio. It's all signal. And he does what an analytic philosopher is supposed to do. He's just infatuated or enthralled with argumentation and different scenarios for making this or that case. He keeps in touch with his professional community through Facebook, and he keeps in touch with former students through Facebook. And the other thing to know about this guy is he has some odd ideas that I don't want to credit at all, particularly to do with immigration. And he had posted on that about a decade ago. And somebody did a screen capture on it, and it wound up circulating among some of the faculty, particularly in social science, where I was division chair. And they projected it onto their screens and used it as sort of an object lesson for their students about how, whatever the term is, xenophobia, or however you want to categorize it, an object lesson in how it lurks among us in our very halls. Long story short, this guy, he was invited on the Tucker Carlson show, and I thought he handled it with great dignity. Carlson baited him again and again to throw his colleagues under the bus, and he refused. At one point, he interrupted and said, "Tucker, these are my friends, and I love them, but I do want to talk about what it's like to be excommunicated from a small community." No one had ever accused him of proselytizing in the classroom for particular views, only representing different kinds of arguments. So what did he lose? What did he lose? Well, in a small community, you're going to be, it's a repeat, in game theory terms, it's a repeated game. You're going to be with the same people on search committees, on curriculum committees, on recruiting events, at lectures. You're going to be working together for decades, possibly. And the image on the left is Marcel Marceau doing his famous, the walls are closing in around me sort of routine. And this is a real phenomenon in smaller institutions. If you hive off some portion of your colleagues because of something that they took offense to, the walls close in on you. Now, we all have our external professional communities, but we also interact on a daily basis with each other. And I think it's a shame the way this played out, and I think I'll leave it at that. But that's an anecdote from our own experience out here at the Morris campus. I'll give you one more. Excuse me. I was, while I was, we don't call them deans, but I was essentially the dean of social sciences here. We tried repeatedly to hire a biopsychology person, a neuroscientist, and we were having the hardest time. And one fell in my lap over the pandemic. So this guy had been at the Max Planck Institute in Europe, and he taught in the graduate program in Spain. He had over 5,000 citations to his research, which I think may be the most of anyone of the 100 or so faculty that we have at UMN Morris. Anyway, he was a quite successful person in his field, and he had returned to Western Minnesota because his parents needed attention, and he'd moved back onto their farm and blah blah blah. Anyway, he showed up in the applicant pool. As I handed off the reins, so I hired him as an adjunct, and he served very well for a couple of years. That we ran a tenure track search shortly after that, and he turned out not to show up in the pool. And I ran into him and asked him, well, why? So there's a different higher authority now. I asked him why he had decided not to apply, and he said, well, they had required a DEI statement, which he considered forced speech. Now, is he right about that? I don't know. We could hold that up to the light and refract it. But I think the argument I would make is that what's gained by a DEI statement. Well, look, I'm an economist. I'm trained in the idea that talk is cheap, that only behavior and action is worth paying attention to, especially now that AI can generate your DEI statement in a heartbeat. I just concluded a search with 400 applicants, and I would guess 350 of them were AI-generated cover letters. I think there is zero information gathered in exchange for, and some things lost, and some things lost. And I think this guy, I have no idea what his political views are, or, but that's part of the texture of a small liberal arts college. And could we go to the next slide? I'd like to end on a metaphor. So one of the things I have loved about teaching out here over the years, I've gotten a chance to teach several interdisciplinary courses. Some biologist friends talk about a phenomenon called positive plant soil feedback. where plants, through their root systems, pull up certain minerals to the surface or change the pH of the soil, or their or as they decompose at the end of a growing season, they somehow alter the chemistry of the soil in a way that's favorable to their own species. And that can be good. And it can produce things like a couple examples of that from the native prairie are little bluestem and purple coneflower. But other invasives use a sort of similar technology to establish their own monoculture. Common buckthorn, Japanese knotweed are a couple of enemies we have out here. And so my talk has been brief and generally lacked substance, but I've tried to talk about sort of the grassroots, the way things feel on the ground, what conditions, speech, and how we can try always to be a little better than we have been. And so I will leave it there. Send it back to the panel.
Thank you. I would say you did not lack substance. That was very good. And now I know what you were going to say when you sent me those slides. I told Dr. Kildegaard I was a little afraid of what he was going to say because I didn't understand the slides. So thank you. Thank you to all three panelists. If they would turn their camera back on. We've only got about 10 minutes, but there are several audience questions. And then I had one question. Since I get to moderate, I get to ask my first one. Please comment, any of the three of you, on the effect of rhetoric and headlines, et cetera, on your international students. I know Macalester's got a huge international body. Mankato in Minnesota has a huge international body. I don't know about Morris. Of course, the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. I live right here. I see it all the time. Could any of you or all three comment on, are your international student applications down? Are they comfortable? Et cetera.
I'm happy to start. There have been quite a few things this past year that have messaged in a lot of different ways a disregard for our international students and scholars. And I think that there's no question that the University of Minnesota, as well as colleges and universities around the country, benefit enormously from international students and scholars and have for all of our history. I think that those who've wanted to restrict the presence of international students and scholars sometimes suggest that it's about making more opportunities for American citizens in different regards. And I think that that is quite wrong-headed. I understand concerns about economic opportunity. I think those are real and important, and we need to be talking about it. But when you, for instance, take a look at who gets Nobel Prizes in different areas, one of the things you inevitably see is that there will be some that are awarded to folks in the United States at different universities who came here as international students and stayed and helped to create whole new fields and whole new sets of opportunities. I think from the perspective of democracy, I think from the perspective of academic excellence, our international students and scholars contribute a great deal. We try to message a lot about that being important to us and that these are valued members of our community. And the one nice story I will tell you to end with here is, as we were looking to start the semester and we were concerned, given the extreme presence of ice in the cities, about people coming into the airport. We arranged for transportation for folks, and many of our alumni showed up with big signs saying U of M international students welcome, and made sure that people were greeted in the right way.
Anyone else want to speak to the international kids or faculty?
I'll go very quickly on both of those points. Internationalism is the leading principle in our mission at Macalester College. President Sue Rivera, our executive vice president, Lisa Anderson Levy, have been at the national forefront of defending our students and faculty and have taken extraordinary steps to make sure people get to and from campus safely, that visas are secured. I've had several students this semester who have had serious changes in their living situations because of some of the events of the last few weeks, and the institution's done extraordinary work. I will say our senior leadership, for all their creativity and strength in standing up, face ridiculous pressures from both alumni and folks who disagree with them across the country, who will just write and harass and threaten the institution. And so the crossfire politically right now for folks who have to answer and speak in ways that will get them taken into court has been extraordinary to see their courage and their creativity to find a middle path that serves everyone. And it's still evolving. It's not a finished process by any means, but the layers of division about these very contentious issues are still hour by hour, minute by minute, threatening to tear us apart, both within the college and across the country. So I wanted to take a second to highlight Macalester's commitment, but also talk about the real pressure we're under because of the decisions our leaders are making.
I think it's fair to say that many of our um, um, not necessarily immigrants, but for example, Somali students from the Twin Cities are terrified. They're terrified, and they get behind the scenes support from various branches of the government of the university, but we haven't had sort of clear interference run from well, we just changed chancellor, so that's a different kettle of fish. But I also think that our support staff are speaking in a much quieter voice. They're much more careful about making pronouncements in audiences they're comfortable making those pronouncements, and I don't blame them. I don't blame them. They're under a tremendous amount of pressure.
Another question is, how are the students? Are they actively arguing with each other in your classrooms? Are they having constructive criticism? Are they thinking about multiple ideas? Are they silenced? Do you feel like good, constructive, civil discussion is going on? Or can you see a difference from 10 years ago, 20 years ago in how students in your classrooms are behaving with respect to feeling stifled?
I'll take a quick swing at that one. I feel very definitely that we're dealing with the COVID generation right at the moment, and they are different from all their ancestors in all the ways you'd expect. They're very uncomfortable. My students, I speak for my students, the students I encounter are very uncomfortable with any kind of hint of politics in the classroom or any kind of controversy in the classroom. They're very conflict averse, and they've never learned debate skills or learned to be comfortable outside of the sort of narrow chat rooms that they participate in themselves. So it's a strain, I think.
I would agree with that. And there was a big national poll done the summer before last by Ipsos and the Knight Foundation that found that college students broadly desired to be able to participate in robust conversations on controversial issues with folks who had different points of view and were deadly afraid of it. And felt that it was very hard to participate in such conversation, felt that it was important to their college education, so that's good news, but also felt that that was not something they were readily equipped to do. I agree with Arne that part of the story is about COVID and a loss of social skill and social comfort, if you will. I also think that the other things that contributed to it, one is, again, political polarization in the sense that the stakes are high and people are going to go after you. And the other is social media. And students certainly cite that quite a bit as one of the things that makes them wary. Now, I will also say that one, I think a good liberal arts education helps to build these skills in a way that is enormously beneficial to students, and that a lot of um, universities, and Minnesota is certainly among them, are focused more on how can we be more deliberate about developing skills and experiences for students so that they can become more comfortable with having these kinds of conversations and doing it in a way that they themselves will become more informed about what they think and believe.
Definitely want to amplify that last point. The work I do with Macalester, while in the history department, we have a large service load. We serve students from across the curriculum, and I see most folks before they hit junior year. So that experience, I'm watching them transform from enthusiastic high school seniors who are excited to start college into more confident young adults who are equipped with skills to engage in social media and really in debate in any setting where they're going to grapple with hard questions and disagree with each other forcefully and still walk away amicably. Now, I'll say that's generally the tone. There are kind of undercurrents there where there are real rifts. And I'll say in particular, among students of African descent who are either from Minnesota or from the cities versus students who are from the Caribbean or from West Africa. That's just one area there where you'll see real sharp things where people will avoid each other, even into the terms of the student groups that they organize and the kinds of social activities that they'll engage. And so there's this not just political polarization, but a kind of cultural and ethnic balkanization that students are negotiating as young adults. And I spend a lot of time working with faculty colleagues and administrative colleagues, giving us the best tools to help people cross those boundaries so they can get the most out of their time that they share in these campus environments. But that's very difficult. We need much more engagement, not just on the campuses, but across the state to get better at that as just a community of people, as a state itself.
Yeah, great points. We're going to go over, and so if people have to hop off, I understand, but I'm not letting the panelists go. Just one more question, and then I'll do our closing slide. So we're over, but several people have expressed fear that the quality of students, that the quality of teachers and profs might go down because of this polarized session. They didn't really ask questions, but I wanted to kind of pass that on to the panel so you'd heard that from our viewers. And then a couple of people asked, do you think the push for STEM, we've had a pretty pronounced in just heavy emphasis on STEM for more than a decade, I'd say. Do you feel like that has changed our ability to use the liberal arts and the power of persuasion and the power of reading and understanding what you're reading, et cetera? Has that changed anything, or is STEM just, it's good that we're finally increasing our involvement in our scientific, with our scientific brothers?
I certainly don't think that having strength in STEM areas is contrary to a liberal arts and sciences education or approach to knowledge. I think the benefit of having a broad education like that is certainly the humanistic and the social scientific and the ability to have kind of dialogue and engagement is key. But I would also say different ways of knowing the world is part of having critical perspectives. And that the benefit that comes when people interact across different starting points is enormous. I will also say a colleague of mine at Cornell once commented on the fact that there was a generation of physicists who disproportionately had made breakthroughs theoretically and had been quite awarded for it. And his view was that it was because they had gone to graduate school in the late 60s and early 70s and didn't assume their professors or the theories they were reading were right, but had the perspective to question them. And so for me, scientific sensibilities, mathematical sensibilities are part of the breadth with which we want to approach understanding complex issues in the world around us.
Dr. Greason, Dr. Kildegaard, any comments on the push
Yeah.
towards STEM? Does that take away from?
I can jump on that. We felt it at Macalester that traditionally it is a place based on international relations and fostering diplomacy, where we've had a strong shift towards environmental science, environmental studies, and then statistics and computer science. So that's definitely changed the character of the institution. And again, a good bit of the work I do with colleagues there is getting our fine arts and humanities folks to have a little bit more sophistication in talking about science or math and not necessarily being allergic to numbers. But at the same time, our science faculty are extraordinarily strong advocates for wanting more humanistic and fine arts foundation for the science and for the technical work that they do. So I think, again, being much more purposeful about the way we have folks communicate across their areas of expertise, it makes us all a little bit more thoughtful and a little bit better at the things that we're already specialized in.
Dr. Kildegaard, are you good?
One of the examples I didn't get to because my voice was giving out was and an ecumenical group from the sciences and the humanities put together an interdisciplinary environmental studies program 15 years ago, 18 years ago. And it had elements. I mean, I teach environmental policy and natural resource management and history of global climate change negotiations and all that. What wound up happening, and it's sort of a sore point for me. I know we're not supposed to complain on this about our institution, but the scientists circled the wagons and created their own environmental science major, which is essentially hollowed out the environmental studies major. And in it, there's no consideration of how humans interact with the environment in any way, shape, or form, or how the human imagination affects the way we consider the environment. And I think that was a mistake, though I am very much pro-science. Sometimes the chauvinism sort of comes, sometimes the chauvinism comes from the science side, directed at all the soft fields of humanity.
Well, I trained as a medical doctor, and I was an English major in my undergrad, and there's just no comparison in the way that things are taught. And maybe things are a little bit different now in medical school, but there's a big thing that people complain about with their doctors of we don't listen, we don't hear, and we're not synthesizing the constellation of complaints and so on. And that's humanities right there, in my opinion. Oh, I gave a little opinion. I wasn't complaining either, Dr. Arnegaard. So we have one last second to please ask you if you have any action items for our viewers. Our viewers are smart, they're interested, they're very avidly aware of their world. And if there's anything that you would like to have us do or think about, we'd love to hear it. If anyone's got a quick comment, and then I'll go to my closing slides. And thank you for being here. You've just been fabulous. Any action item for any of you?
I had one item. One item is really very quick and easy. If folks can take more time to engage with independent and investigative media, the things that you're going to get from broadcast or cable or large media resources, mass media resources, are less reliable than they've ever been. So engage more with folks who take time to dig deeper. And so whether that's Minnesota Public Radio, whether that's for me, it's the Minnesota Spokesman Recorders, a new website outlet. Find new voices as much as you can to bring new information to the table.
Thank you.
I will certainly support that perspective. I think engaging with a variety of media sources is absolutely critical, and media sources where there's real depth of the work, I think, is critical. And the other thing I would say is comes back a little bit to your introduction, Cheryl. We benefit so much from having the contributions of colleges and universities, whether they are small or large, public or private. The positive impact in our world is enormous, and I fear that we are forgetting that in some ways these days. So anything that we can do to support that broader ecosystem would be, I think, a benefit to all of us.
Yeah. Dr. Kildegaard?
I
From
have
prairies
nothing
of
to add. They've spoken very beautifully and eloquently.
Okay.
I'll leave it
Good.
there.
Good. Well, if I could go to my last couple slides, let's see what comes up here. Yes, please join us on this program. You can see the details there. On January 28th of this year, just a few weeks ago, the FBI seized hundreds of boxes of ballots, ballot images, and voter rolls from Fulton County Election Hub from the 2020 election, from an election that was over 5 years ago. There was no chain of evidence performed. I'm an election judge. Any election judge is watching. That just makes us so triggered we can't even stand it. And for unknown reasons, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was present. So on February 2nd of 2026, Fulton County Commissioner Marvin Arrington Jr. filed a motion challenging the legality of this search and seizure. Please come. We are the League of Women Voters. We really care about voting, and voting security is everything. And these are the big heavy hitters in Minnesota. And once again, I capitalize the A in David Triplett. Sorry, because I make terrible slides. This is an in-person. I think they'll probably have a remote option too, but you can scan this. You can look up on their website, on our website, and that's March 24th at 6:30 p.m. Next slide. We are fully committed to our nonpartisan nature, but we do educate the public on candidates and issues. For over 100 years, we study issues, we take positions, and we take action. Next slide. You can always look at our website to learn more about membership in the League of Women Voters St. Paul. We would welcome you. Please give us a try. We went bowling this week, and then we meet with these wonderful people on a Sunday. So there couldn't be anything better. Next slide, please. Again, we just give massive gratitude to our speakers. You have enriched our lives and enriched our brains. And thank you so much for spending some time on your Sunday when it's so beautiful outside. And last slide, I hope you've enjoyed our program. We thank you for watching, and we hope you'll join us again on March 24th at the Ramsey County Library in Roseville on Hamlin Avenue. Have a wonderful afternoon.